Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm joined by my co-host, attorney Sonia Madison. How you doing, Sonia?
Well, I am doing okay. It's been a nice little weather week. I mean, the shutdown is still having an effect, and I do hate it. I don't know about you, but I do have friends that are kind of worried that they work for the federal government, and so
Are we
it's
still talking
interesting
about
because
the shutdown?
I
Are we,
know.
s- it's
Well,
I
that's
mean,
what's so interesting. I feel like when we had to shut down during Trump's first term, it was a lot more think pieces on it. But I don't know if we've just become so immune, but I feel like now it's just like government, they continue to be chaotic.
or is it strategic? You throw out a couple of other controversial things and have a couple of other things to distract the media's attention away from the shutdown, so that you can gut the federal government like you want to. But anyway, I digress a little bit. But you were speaking empathetically about some of your friends who might
We
be
did have a judge
impacted.
that recently halted the furlough, to your point, because I think they
Mhm.
were trying to go ahead and furlough like maybe tens of thousands of federal workers, and we had a judge say, no, you're not going to do that. But I'd imagine, at least I'm sure this advice has been given that a lot of these workers are probably looking for other jobs.
hmm And it'd be hard to actually reassemble it. I mean,
It will be.
once you deconstruct it, it's hard to reconstruct afterwards. It's just brilliant strategy. I think whoever wrote Project 2025 really understood, some of the complexities of building big government.
Well, there have been some recent legal stuff. Like I said, I mentioned that. We also had the Voter Rights Act is up before the Supreme Court. And what's essentially at issue is in Louisiana, they did some redistricting, and it turns out I think they make up maybe blacks make up maybe 30% or so, but only received one district that was predominantly black. And so they, of course, took that to the courts. Court said, yeah, we do see some racial gerrymandering happening here, and so you need to try again. And so what they did the second time was essentially create two predominantly black districts. So then the white people sued. And so, then what's before the Supreme Court is essentially whether race should be taken into consideration, even if it is to right a historical wrong. And I think a lot of people are giving, or and maybe this is just Fox News, but of course we all anxiously wait to see what Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson has to say because that's just the world we live in. We want to see what the Black people say. And some of her questions were tailored towards, listen, if you are essentially handicapping someone because of their race, then your remedy has to be to take that into consideration, right? And she used the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so people are saying, oh, she's calling Black people disabled. Again, if you want to find an issue, you'll find an issue. But the legitimate point is you use race to offset Black votes. So then you're going to have to use race to ensure they have access to voting and their voice is actually being heard. Um, but yeah, so it sounds from what I'm reading, it sounds like the Supreme Court may try to gut the Voting Rights Act even more so than it has previously, because I'm sure as you guys recall as avid viewers or listeners, that the Supreme Court did weaken already previously some of the Voting Rights Act. And essentially usually some of these states, particularly Alabama, Georgia, and the like, they'd have to get permission to change even redistricting or pollings. And so we've kind of removed that part, while still upholding the fact that, hey, you still have to remedy the wrong. And so now the question is, can we use race to remedy the wrong?
Interesting. I watched a sermon or a message, a lecture, whatever you want to call it, by a gentleman named Vadi Bachman. I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but he's a black gentleman who was doing a whole sermon or lecture on social justice versus biblical justice. And most of his, I don't know if you can really say that it was a comparison between the two because he never really defined what biblical justice was, but he spent all 55 minutes of his lecture speaking about what social justice was. And he not only defined it using his words, but he defined it using the words of scholars who have published thousands and thousands upon manuscripts and books and articles about social justice. And so he made the point of saying that social justice is a redistribution of wealth, of access, resources, and privileges and things. The name goes on toward those people who are disadvantaged. Um, and the argument that he was making was that that redistribution is unfair. But the part that I think that he keenly left out, and maybe intentionally left out, was that there's a need for the redistribution because an injustice, a social injustice, created the need for redistribution of it. And so a lot of times we start looking at as I'm sure the Supreme Court will be considering at this point, hopefully they will be considering the fairness of redistribution, but you can't just look at it just in a vacuum. You have to look at it in the context of saying, why is there a disparity right now? And has the mechanisms and systems that created that disparity persisted or have they been remedied? And I don't think they've been remedied. You know, you say that everybody has equal access to other things. It still has not been remedied yet, obviously, not when you can draw, districting lines around a particular group of people intentionally, you know.
I mean, it's gaslighting to me at its finest because you've used these systems to ensure that they maintain a certain economic status, that they are only regulated to certain schools, that they have certain access to certain businesses and whatnot. I mean, you've used it to pretty much curtail them into certain neighborhoods or certain districts. But then you're also using race to gerrymander, but then want to argue, well, I mean, to fix it would be discriminating against us white people, and that's not fair. And it's just like, well, you've used these systems to ensure that we are pretty much confined to certain areas. And so for then you to then use that to say, well, tough luck for you guys. Everywhere else is predominantly white. And so we're just going to make sure that for the most part, our voice is the loudest. I
This
mean,
is every opportunity afforded one person. Does it have to be necessarily the antagonistic part of it? I mean, that it means that if it's for somebody, it means you're against somebody else. Doesn't necessarily mean that necessarily.
I mean, I
Where you
would
said
agree with
I'm,
you. I mean, just because, someone else is getting kind of the crabs in a bucket. Just because someone else is getting help doesn't mean that hurts my ability to receive help. I
Mhm.
agree, but you even know sometimes even with us, we feel like, oh, they're only going to they being whoever versus employer, government, whatever, is only going to permit one of us to make it. And so, yes, your success is my failure. But I don't think that that should be a mentality at all.
Hmm. Well, unfortunately, that's the way that is, especially when you want to try to keep when it's an effort to keep power. And I think what happens is we don't understand that it's all about achieving power and influence. Even that the same lecture I was telling you about, Vadi Blackman, I guess he took a long time to build up to a particular point, was saying that social justice demands that every group get treated with equity. And I'm sitting listening to him like, yeah, what's the problem with that? Yes, that's one of the reasons why we are in the United States of America. That's the reason why the Constitution says all men are created equal and are endowed with certain or endued with certain inalienable rights. And to me, I'm sitting there thinking like, where's your point? And I get he was talking to a group of Christians, and he was saying that if there is an injustice, the one who perpetrates that injustice is perceived then as the oppressor, and the one who doesn't or who receives that injustice is then the oppressed. And so he went down the list, eventually got to the point where he was trying to say that the oppressors historically, according to critical race theory, he was saying, is white, straight, male. And so, therefore, if you're anything other than a white, straight male, then you are oppressed. I don't necessarily agree with that, but historically, those who have oppressed have been white, straight males. And so he was saying the group that really needs the redistribution, the ones who are suffering the social injustice, you can start off with race, but then there's so many other things, carts that are added behind that train once that locomotive, once it gets moving. So there's race, there's uh, sexual orientation, there is, you know,
Gender.
economic and gender and everything else that you have to then endorse all these other things. And I'm thinking like, yeah, the key part of social justice is social, which means this, the root word of that is what the society has deemed to be fair and equitable amongst the members of its society. If the society writes a law and writes in their constitution that every person has certain inalienable rights, then yes, that person should have those same inalienable rights. I get that you as a Christian don't like it, but because you continue to fight against it, you too are labeled as one of those. And that's what he was getting at. It's one of those oppressors that now Christianity is now perceived as one of the oppressors. And I get it. I agree with that. You know, a friend of mine was, you know, and everybody's like, oh, no, no, Christians aren't oppressors. Christians are oppressors. When you think about it, if they dared try to teach Islam in some of the schools in America, if they put any of the precepts of Islam on the walls, like they're trying to do with the Ten Commandments, and I guess they probably are still probably do still subscribe to the Ten Commandments though. But if they tried to put any other precepts of Islam on the walls of schools, do you know the kind of outrage that would be? The reason why Christianity is considered potentially an oppressor is not because of the sheer numbers, but because we utilize our political force to cause others to conform to our ideology. And that does make you an oppressor. And I think the problem is let's not get upset about Christianity being perceived as oppressors. Let's get upset about why we got to that position. And that's because of how we've misrepresented what Christ and Christianity is all about to people.
Well, you make it a point to say there's a difference between the church and I guess people who profess to be Christians.
Yeah.
Because I honestly had this conversation with a cousin of mine where he argued, and I feel like you would make that same argument that God oppresses, and I feel like God suppresses. I don't think he oppresses because and I'd imagine Christianity to me is the same way. You understand you have the free will, just like in the Adam and Eve story. Hey, I am giving you free reign over here. I'm giving you an instruction not to do X, but you still have the free will to do it if that is so you desire. And I feel like that's the same way with Christianity. Hey, listen, you're born sinners. You have the free will to do whatever you want. However, I've created you for X, and if you choose to follow me, you will live out the purpose by which I've created you for. And so to me, then there's some suppression being there, but I don't know if I would classify it as oppression. When I really think of oppression, I really think of slavery, Jim Crow laws. I mean, stuff that was truly in place that takes away your free will. I don't think Christianity takes away your free will.
Not
Now,
until it becomes a law,
but
of the
you would
land.
make the argument that we shouldn't be involved in the law. That should be a separate thing than Christianity. And to me, when people was getting on Jesus about Caesar's tax, and he said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar," I feel like he's even saying, listen, I'm not here to overthrow Rome or to tell you what the law should be X, Y, Z. If that is their law, that is their law. I am here to give you the opportunity to see Christianity through the lens of love and obedience. Now you can choose which way you want to go, but I'm not oppressing you to prevent you from making that choice.
And even the I can understand how people say I'm constrained through the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit does constrain us. but it doesn't do it through law. It does it through compulsion of the heart. And so as your heart gets changed and motivated and connected to God's, then you are constrained from conducting and behave and engaging in certain behaviors. Yes. And in that regard is a constraint, but it's not necessarily an oppression because you can always break free from it. You can always say, you know what? I'm no longer doing this. See you later, God. Deuces. And and go about life your own way. Move however you choose to move at that point. But I wouldn't call it an oppression. And so it was interesting because this guy said if everybody was supposed to be, if we really saw equity, then that means that God was a God of inequity. And as a result, he's a God of injustice. And I guess the point that he was making in that situation was that God happened to bless me with more melanin than a lot of other people, And but if we were looking at equity, then we should all have the same amount of melanin. And if we were looking at equity, we should all have the same height and how bland of a society that would be. And on its surface, it would seem like it's a pretty reasonable argument. But the issue is not diversity, that the fact diversity does not necessarily produce inequity. Inequity is, and God does show favor on whom he chooses to show favor on. So you would consider that inequity. Yes, that would be considered inequity. Um, but if you are a Christian, then you submit to the sovereignty of God and you understand that God has a purpose in it that we don't understand because he can see the end from the beginning. That's a lot different than humans imposing inequity on you and doing things to benefit themselves. God doesn't provide those disparities to benefit himself, but humans do impose those types of restrictions and oppressions, not to benefit the person who is on the other end of it, but to benefit themselves. And I think that's where inequity really comes in. It's why, what is God's purpose in doing this? And if you don't understand what God's purpose, maybe you'll never understand what his purpose
You
was
said
in
we may not
creating you.
understand the purpose
You may
because
never.
we even read the Bible, and yes, particularly Old Testament, we know he had his chosen people. We know that even they acknowledge it is only because I've been chosen, not because anything special that I've done that warrants me any more favor than someone else. But then we also see, because we're seeing in hindsight, we also see him choosing people who were not Israelites to still perpetuate his will. I mean, again, the story of Ruth and Esther, I mean, she wasn't born into the Jewish faith or whatnot. And so she kind of married into it. But again, you see how important she is to her mother-in-law and to the faith of that. And then you see it in other instances with Moses and his wife, or I want to say the second or third because he's had multiple. But she immediately went and said, "Well, we got to circumcise this child because that's your custom," and that she wasn't born into that faith. And so we do see God using people who were not chosen to still perpetuate His will, but we may not, to your point, recognize that, hey, I am still valuable to this purpose because again, you're not going to see it through the lens of God.
Yeah. So to that end, in moving into our topic, I'm challenged a lot of times because I get accused of being liberal. And the reality is that I'm not liberal,
What does that
particularly
even mean?
not well, I'm not liberal in the political sense where they
But
describe it.
what
You
is
say, "Oh, you're."
liberal in the political sense? So
In
what
the
does that
political
mean?
sense, liberal means that you're for all kinds of the way that conservatives interpret
Healthcare
that.
for all?
No, 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 no. The way that
That's not liberal.
conservatives define it means that you are demonic and you are all about darkness and that you support things that are evil and contrary
I'm
to the
gonna
will
say
of God.
healthcare for all,
Yeah.
socialism.
Yeah. And Marxism, all that
All
stuff,
that,
it's
yeah.
all considered by a lot of conservatives to be liberalism. And I'm like, the reality of it is that I'm a very conservative person. But and they say, but the reason why they say that I'm liberal is because they see me criticizing conservatives, not just conservatives, but Christian conservatives. And that's where all my focus usually winds up going toward Christians. And I've had several people who told me, well, you shouldn't be criticizing Christians publicly like that because it undermines the faith. I said, no. There's a scripture, I think, in Timothy that talks about if a person comes in and they continues, if an elder If a leaders continue to spread false doctrine, to reprove them publicly so that all may be able to see that. And so I'm like, no, I'm not going to just reprove you privately. You put it out there publicly for a lot of other people who would be Christ seekers to see. And now they're deterred because they're like, something's not right about what you're saying. Then you expect me to leave that just out there in the atmosphere? No, I'm going to put that kind of business out. There's a scripture, I think Isaiah 58, where it talks about show the house of Jacob to Jacob. And that's one of the things that really motivates me most to keep doing this is because nobody wants to see the error or the folly of their ways. And if they do, they want you to do it privately. But some things actually need to be taken care of publicly. Everybody talking about some keep that in the house. That ain't supposed to even be out there. I think I'm not very familiar with it, but I know Doris was maybe you're more familiar with the story behind Steph Curry and his wife that she did an interview or something like that. Are you aware of that
You've got multiple
recently?
interviews. So you have to tell me what
So
specifically you're.
this interview she was doing, she was saying she never envisioned her life to be like it was. That she was planning, she had all these grandiose ideas and plans about never really wanted to be a wife, never wanted to be a mother or anything like that. She had these grandiose ideas of being the it girl, the people who, they recognize her and
So
she
like
was
the
well on.
actress, I do think she mentioned wanting to do entertainment at some point.
Right, right. And so the way that it was interpreted was as if she was just really discontent. And so a lot of people would say things like, you know how many people kill to be in your shoes, and you're gonna go out and disrespect your husband like this by saying, this isn't the way that you expected your life to be. I'm like, why are you so upset about her saying something like this? It's not like she says, I hate my life, my life is miserable or anything. She would never say that, but the point is that a lot of people feel like those kinds of discussions should be kept behind closed doors and not necessarily brought out into the public sphere. And unfortunately, I guess sometimes when you're in an interview, you don't, those people ask you all kinds of questions. And a lot of times you don't know which question is coming up. And you respond to the question in the amount of honesty and with the amount of honesty that you can and probably feel like is pretty harmless to do until somebody else looks at it and say, oh, that was inappropriate to bring that out and everything.
I will say, I think there is a difference between sharing your feelings that has really nothing to do with your marriage. It's just, your feelings of what you contemplated versus if it was something like, yeah, I don't like my life and I can't believe I married this NBA player. I do think that that should be in-house. And maybe even going back to scripture, have we had the in-house discussion first before you decided to put this on the platform? Because I remember you and I were talking about this with Kurt Franklin. And I want to say how he had, I don't know if it was issues with his son. I think it was with his son who kind of publicly blasted him. And I think he kind of felt like he should handle that in-house. And whereas I was like, well, I mean, there's been a public blast, then, to some degree, you can also respond publicly. But I do think, and I know this may sound hypocritical, but I do think at first you should try to handle it in-house. Kevin Federline is coming out with this book talking about Britney Spears, and it's just kind of like that was your spouse, that was your family. For you to now blast that publicly, I think is disrespectful. And you know how I feel about Kamala Harris and what she's doing on her tour. I'm just like, okay, again, did you have these conversations in house? Because I do feel like it's disrespectful for you to blast it all now. And I don't think it helps. Even when we talk about the young Republicans. But their texts being leaked, talking some of them saying, I love Hitler and
Yeah, you
I
can keep
wish.
that in the house. Keep that in the house.
But first I'm like, did you guys talk about this or was someone just trying to blast all of you? Because I mean, first of all, I don't know about you, but I wasn't surprised. I think we've said over and over how it's clear that white supremacist groups are using the Republican Party to advance their message. So to me, when this came back, I'm like, why are people shocked? This is what I expect them to say behind closed doors. But now, for people to come and be like, oh, well, they're just kids, or oh, I don't agree with
Not
that.
people,
Well,
not just people. The
JD
vice
Vance.
president of the
Yes.
United States to say that. Yeah.
And I'm just like, did you handle this in-house? Did you, but because to me, this should be no shock. There's outside know this going on. Did you handle it in-house? And if you didn't, then yeah, let's bring it out publicly because you're not handling it in-house. And we see how this is affecting our government, our culture so much more so in any realm. And so it does need to be dealt with. And if you're not going to deal with it in-house, then yes, bring it out of house. But I'm just wondering, have you dealt with it in-house? Because if not, then I don't appreciate you blasting it outside the house.
So this is probably where some of I think his wife got into a little trouble because two things. One, she was saying that she never really now that she's Steph Curry's wife, she never really people just don't even hit at her. People don't even try to. And she's an attractive lady. So people don't really try to holler at her or something like that. And she's like, I got married kind of young and you kind of want to know that, you people still find you attractive at this point. She's expressing some very now I'm getting it third hand sec because I didn't really see the interview myself, but she's talking about to the extent where, hey, I kind of want, you miss that kind of attention. You get married at the age of 19, and now here years later, you're like, man, nobody ever really seems to give me any type of attention or anything. And I know, I guess I presume for a lot of women, and even for men, it's important to know that people see value in you.
Especially for
Let's call
me.
it that
You
way.
guys keep cheating and stuff. So
Whatever. It's first of all, don't throw me in the you guys part. But now you got as many women cheating on men as there are men cheating on women anymore. And a lot of times, most of the marriages that I'm aware of that are breaking up right now are breaking up because the women are cheating. And I get that because they find themselves lacking some of the attention, especially if they got married when they were young. And so I have to keep a close eye on my wife because we got married when she was 23. We were 23. But the point is,
you
she's
were
like, well, what
oppressing
have
her.
I missed?
Yeah.
Huh?
You were oppressing her.
Right. Well, you know what? The funny part was about she was running around the house this morning. No, I never knew love like this before.
I mean, if
I
it's
was
in your
like,
dreams, then we'll make it true.
but I'm just telling you what happened this morning. I was like, no, where did that song come from? I know you didn't just hear it, but I guess she probably was just thinking it, and it was so much in her spirit that she had to go around singing, "I never knew love like this before." And so I'm like, okay, okay, she still got it.
That's what I hear
Still
kids do that
doing the
to
right
you.
thing, huh?
I hear kids do that to you.
Well, the challenge is how do you then stay, attractive, and how do you get that type of reinforcement, that positive reinforcement, especially after your children are gone. We're in a whole different state in our lives where, a lot of women spend their time focusing on raising their family and raising their children, and then they find out, well, who am I after the children are gone? Or as the children are getting older, and I'm sure that Steph Curry's wife was probably thinking some of the same thing. Who am I? Do I still exist? Do I exist apart from this person? And is my own identity or is my whole identity tied up in this person? And that's one of those things I think that can be toxic if you try to keep that in house. I appreciate the fact that she did share that out in public because there are probably a lot of women who probably feel the same way. And probably a lot of men who feel the same way that say, I'm overlooked right now. I'm not seen by people. Not that I need validation from people that I don't know, but it's kind of nice, when somebody who you don't know finds you attractive. Everybody who's not um who doesn't enjoy that every once in a while, except for the people who get it all the time and get jerks that come up and approach them all the time. And so I'm sure that happens to you all
I
the
don't know
time.
my life. Again, and I still think that that is different than her expressing a gripe on her marriage, because to me, even that is still something that's a personal insecurity. It's not anything that is something that Steph Curry could do or any, I mean, to me, that's just expressing a whole personal feeling, which I'm with you. By all means, share that with people because there are a lot of people that probably feel the same way. And so, you can let them know that they're not alone. But if she were to say something of the effect of, yeah, me and my husband got into this big fight and he just doesn't understand X, Y, and Z, I would be like, can you keep that in-house? Can you guys resolve that and not put that on a public platform?
So here's where I agree that she probably crossed the line. It's because I think she was asked the question, so how does Steph respond to this? And she's like, he doesn't take it seriously. And I was like, well, okay. So I don't know how that responds. Now that's probably should have been kept in the house. Um,
I would
but
agree.
but at this point, you're into the conversation. You're already into it, and you could say, yes, we have had this conversation with it, and you can present it in different ways. It's kind of hard. I can understand how it can be hard sometimes for people to when they look from the outside, from the inside, you look when they look at what's going on from the outside, their perspective is a lot different than what goes on from the inside. And so you can look at the situation and see, I'm living a charmed life. What can I have? What could you possibly want? And identity. Sometimes that's what you could possibly want is an identity. And so when you bring that kind of stuff up, I do think that people are liberated by it, but I think sometimes people are overly sensitive to it because they would like to maintain an image of something that is not real. And at some point, you have to just expose the lie. And I'm not saying that you need to do that in your marriage. You have to find the right place to be able to release those things so that it's not toxic and further more destructive to your relationships. But sometimes you do have to expose, especially when other people are potentially harmed by some information that you have. Now, in your marriage, not other people aren't going to be potentially harmed by that. But when I look at how people are perceiving Christianity and how the doors to the kingdom of heaven are being shut, slammed by a couple of people who are, pretty loud mouths, I call them salt substitute. I look at that and I say, people are harmed by that. And if people are harmed by that, no, I'm not keeping that type of thing in house. Somebody needs to cry aloud. Somebody needs to be the voice that says, repent and for the kingdom of God, that this is not right. So, um, I do think that there's a difference about who's being harmed by your silence. And if your silence harms just you and not putting it out, then yeah, those things can be handled privately and it should be handled privately. But when it starts to say, hey, I've got, a pedophile brother who's a pedophile, and then next thing I know, he's working in children's church ministry or children's ministry at church. Yeah, I need to say something about this.
But again, I would still encourage you, have you tried to handle it in-house first? Because it reminds me a lot about even when you're talking about like recently there was a pastor in Alabama who is now he pled guilty to 400K embezzlement at the church and whatnot. Um, and I would hope that before that was blasted, before it even because they're stemming these charges from back to 2019, 2020. Okay, during that period, did anyone say something to him? And subsequent even after that, okay, if you said something and he did nothing of that with your information, then yes, start exposing it more and more. And I would say the same with the pedophile. Hey, have you said something not only to him but also to the school before you blast it publicly? Because that also harms the school if you are saying, hey, I've never told y'all this, but you've hired this pedophile and you didn't give them an opportunity to remedy that in-house. So I mean, I'm still like, can we do some in-house remedy first before we just put it on a public platform
Does
and
the does the
shame?
does the severity of the offense impact it? Because there's some things that are illegal, and then there are some things that are just immoral. And when you were saying that, can you handle it in the house first? I'm thinking the first thought that came to my mind was the Catholic Church and how there's a whole pedophilia thing going on within
But
the
were they
Catholic
handling
Church.
it though?
They were what they called handling is they understood that
I don't think they were
I'm sure
handling it.
Well, of course, you don't think they were, but I bet you they thought that they were handling. They were like, we can't let some of this stuff go out. We can't let some of this stuff continue as well.
But you
And so,
kept
in
these
order to,
folks in the church. You kept them in leadership position because it reminds me of the Boy Scouts. Yeah, you might have removed them from a certain troop, but you did not ensure that they were excommunicated or ostracized from the organization in general. And
so
that to
when
me means you didn't handle it in-house.
So when you are an organization that is based on a principle of redemption, do you excommunicate people immediately, or do you rehabilitate them at some point? And so I don't obviously I don't know what was going on within the inner workings of the Catholic Church when they were dealing with these scandals and these atrocities, but I would hoped that they were thinking like, okay, we know that this is wrong, and we cannot allow this person to continue to do this. Let's find a way to redeem this person. Let's shift them from this role, from this leadership position into another one. The problem is that once it's discovered, once it's found out, people will say, you know, you guys did a cover up. No, we weren't covering it up. We were we were actually trying to handle it in house, you know, and
Assuming they
so
were, because again, I'm like, again, going back to the Boy Scouts, you were still putting this person in leadership positions. That's not handling it.
uh, well, if you got somebody in a leadership position, the question, does a person have to be removed from leadership position in order to be rehabilitated?
If you are abusing your position, then yes, I do think you need to be removed from your position.
Uh, so um, I don't necessarily agree with that. And the reason why, and again, it just depends on the severity of the offense to me. It depends on the severity of the offense. There are some people who make dumb mistakes early. Let's say, for example, you have a manager. Your manager is young, new to managing people, and you give them a company credit card, and you find out that that manager is abusing the company credit card and purchasing some financial things for themselves. And once you discover it, do you remove that person from that managerial position, or do you say, "Hey, listen, this is not for personal use. This is strictly for business use, and we're going to monitor your use of this over the next 2, 3 years, or at least until we're confident that the issue is remedied." And maybe you don't give a timeline or anything like that, but that person is still working as the manager, even though they've been embezzling from the company. And so I think a lot of, I
Well,
think a
it
lot of
depends, like you
times,
said, because there are companies that will be like, no, I'm going to remove them from this position because you have embezzled from the company. I mean, that's a serious crime. I hear from your perspective, it's like, well, it depends on how much you embezzled. Because because I mean, don't act like you didn't know you were doing wrong. You knew that that card was not for your personal use, and you intentionally violated it. But I also don't want to compare that to you sexually abusing a kid. I think
right?
that's a little bit
Obviously, we
no.
wouldn't do that. That's the point that I'm saying is that it depends on the severity of the offense, what you can handle in-house. And so right now, I'm concluding two things right now. Right now, it seems like one, it depends on how many other people are unwittingly impacted if it's not disclosed. And then the second one is how big the offense or how severe the offense was. If the offense was very severe, then yeah, I might make it public. I might make it a little bit public. And then also, I would say if
You're like, you're getting embarrassed to ensure
if
that
it
you
harms
say no more, right?
if it harms my reputation by association, I might make it public too. And because what's done, what you think is going to remain private at some point it's going to come out. And when it comes out and you knew about it and you tried to handle it in-house and you tried to keep it hush hush, it makes it seems like you were then an accomplice, or at least that you were aiding and abetting. And so, when you're in certain situations about certain offenses, you're like, yeah, well, some things we just ought not keep in house. Doctors, teachers, we're obligated by law to disclose certain things. If we believe that abuse of a child is going on, we're obligated by law to disclose that
Expose, yes.
immediately.
But what you're
Right.
disclosing is to law enforcement. You're not blasting it on the news media.
It still ain't in the house. It still ain't in the house. I've seen a couple times I'm sitting there thinking like, ooh, don't whip that child like that in front of me. Don't do it. Do not do it in my office. I promise you, do not do it in my office because I can understand because I might whoop my child the same way. But I might be, I could pull you to the side and say, hey, don't do that right here. Or I can just go ahead and whether it's public or not, it's no longer in-house. It's involved some other third party, uninvolved party. And how big that group of the uninvolved party is, it depends, maybe that does play some role into it. But I mean, how if I disclose it to Child Protective Services, that's going to cause, even though there's only one person I disclose it to, it's going to cause a whole heck of a lot of drama and
Maybe or
and
maybe not, because I've watched plenty of documentaries where Child Protective Services didn't do much. And so the exposure was not grand. But nonetheless, from my perspective, yes, you got to follow the law. So if that is your obligation, you have to do that. Um, but at the same time, I'm just also saying, listen, like again, we even talk about the Black church, we talk or the church in general. If we were handling so much more of this in-house, you can't ignore the fact that public exposure also diminishes the reputation of the organization as well, the effectiveness of the organization, and all that. And we've talked multiple times how right now the church has an opportunity to really save some souls. And so, but to me, if you're going to expose how you've held this person accountable. Don't just say, oh, we didn't know what was going on. And so now we see there's an embezzlement and we're going to put you on blast. No, you likely knew what was going on and you ignored it. And that to me is the problem, is why you did not expose it in real time so that you can handle it in-house.
mhm.
And this is often what happens in employment situations is when we are saying, hey, if you are experiencing some type of discrimination or retaliation or not getting your wages, come to us first. Don't blast us on YouTube without giving us an opportunity to cure what it is that you believe is wrong. And I'd imagine even as you, when you were as an employer, you would hope that someone would tell you first before posting it on Google, saying either you're an awful doctor or you're an awful employer.
No one would ever say either of those about me.
I
And
mean,
if
you
they
were
did say it
upset
on
about
Google,
some
I want to
Google
respond.
reviews.
If they did say it on Google, I'm going to respond. So, but so there's so that's one thing about keeping other person's business in house. What about keeping your own business in house? Because I'm reminded of Tony Evans, Pastor Tony Evans, last year decided, hey, I need to step down. I need to set myself down. Now we don't know the story behind it, whether or not some other people said, "Hey, either you tell them this is going to happen, or I'm going to go tell them." And so uh, he might have been under that type of pressure. He might have been under compulsion of the Holy Spirit that says, "Hey, if you don't do it now, I'm going to expose you later." And so
And
you
we're not
do
going
it
to
in a
assume when there's something to expose.
well, well.
We
If
don't
he
want to
said
make
it,
that assumption.
well, he said that he had some moral failures that he needs to step down and deal with. So, whatever those are, it's if you have to remove yourself from ministry, then there's some moral
Maybe, maybe
failure.
not. We all have
Yeah,
some moral failures. I
we
mean,
all
I'm
do.
just trying to
We
give him
do.
some benefit of the doubt, you
We
know.
do. We do. But if he admits it, I'm gonna let him go ahead and own up to whatever fault he has, and he shares however much he wants to. I understand that. I think over the past week or so, sometime this month, I think he returned to the pulpit,
He did. And
and so
actually, to your point, I was actually listening to him on Lecrae. He was on a Lecrae podcast talking about his ministry. He didn't go into any issue or detail as to why he decided to step down. I mean, he kind of made it seem like that was a plan that has been worked on for years, which I appreciate because and I've talked about this over and over about mentor and succession. I don't know if we do enough to make sure the next generation is prepared. But he mentioned that for years he knew that he was going to hand this down to Jonathan based on, his experience as a chaplain, his experience in the NFL and all this kind of stuff. Now, to your point, I don't know if something happened that moved it quicker than maybe he anticipated. But from what he said, this has been a process in place or a plan in place for a long period of
Yeah. I don't know. I think some things need to be handled in the house. Some
time.
things
Thank
need
you.
to
That's
be
all I'm
handled in
saying.
public.
I think
I
handle
do.
your
I
house
agree.
first. And if it's not handled, then yeah, you got to do what you got to do because it's got to be addressed. It's got to
But what
be.
are the rules? What are the rules of engagement? What are the rules? How do you decide
I feel
which
like we've
ones?
talked about this. The rules are, hey, you go to the person first. That doesn't work. You bring some other people along. If that doesn't work, then you do bring it to the congregation.
Hmm.
I mean, right? I mean, because I mean,
I mean,
again, I
that's the
know at
scriptural.
some point it's
That's the
gonna
scriptural
at
part of
some
it.
point
But
it'll sound like judgment. To me, when you blast it to some degree, it can sound like a judgment on that person. But
hmm.
also, I mean, it does diminish your cause when you are blasting out someone that you've hired or someone that you entrusted that mishandled whatever it is that you're doing.
Well, is that an attempt at redeeming yourself by your association from your association with that
But that's why I'm
person?
encouraging you to handle it in-house. When you
Hmm.
handle it in-house, and by handling it in-house, you then decide we can't communicate with you anymore because that's what's happening with the Jeffrey Epstein. And that's what if ever they decide to officially swear in this Arizona's person who can now be that final vote, I'm sure we're going to see whether or not Donald Trump ever held Jeffrey Epstein accountable
Hmm.
for all the stuff that he was
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah, they and Prince Andrew actually
Yes.
renounced his thing because of the what's going on with that. And
And he
it's one
knows
of those same
eventually it's going to come
situations.
out. Yeah.
It's eventually gonna come out. It already has come out. Some of it has already come
Yeah.
out at this point. And there are some things that I don't know if it's better for you to get ahead of it and accept it yourself, or if it's better to just hope that it never comes out and deal with the
I was gonna
consequences
say, I mean,
when
I
the,
think
when
it's
the
better
house
that
of
you get
cards
ahead of it
fall.
versus you getting caught with your pants down because now it's exposed publicly.
So let's talk about then Kamala Harris then, which I know you have a issue with her having done this. Now, I think the public officials probably do have a little bit more of an obligation to expose things more publicly. And it's always the question is what's the right time to do this? If you are in public office, and unfortunately, a lot of times, if you have aspirations to move beyond your current level, then you have obligations. So with the aspiration comes up certain obligations, um, and some of that means loyalty to your party and for bigger causes. Some people will criticize Kamala, much like you did. And you say, well, she shouldn't have put all this stuff out there on blast. But do the people not have a right to know?
I don't know how you concluded everything that you said and turned it into a right. Um, but what I would say is one, first and foremost,
What kind
some
of
of
right
the
you talking about? Are you talking about like right like privilege,
a right
right
to
as
know
in
because you're like, oh, do they have
okay.
a right to know? Well, I don't know that there's nothing in the Constitution that gives them a right to know what's going on in the Democratic Party. Um, but what I will say is what I'm hearing that's being exposed, because again, I want to make sure it's clear to our audience. I have not read this book and I could be completely wrong. What I'm hearing is being exposed, like for example, she didn't want to choose Pete Buttigieg as VP because she had some kind of fear about, hey, not only am I asking people to trust a Black woman, but it might be too much to ask them to also trust a gay person. To me, that should have been something you handled in-house. If that is who you wanted and you chose not to fight for who you wanted, I don't need to hear it on the book. That was your decision to do. Um, she also was critical of Ben Shapiro, saying that he just kind of came in as if he was campaigning for himself. Again, did you discuss that with him? Putting it on blast, I don't agree with. She was critical of Joe Biden. Again, did you discuss that with him? Because now you're just putting it on blast. And that's my thing is, did you do the one-on-one first? Because I don't like that. Oh, now that I didn't win, I'm going to blast everyone. And it was the same thing when it came with the Trump administration. How some of his officials, when they get fired, they write a book. I don't want to hear your book. Did you do that when you had the position? If you didn't, then you're part of the issue.
So if I'm explaining to you what my thought process is, I don't know how am I going to handle the fact I'm not going to tell Pete Buttigieg you can't be gay anymore. If you stop acting gay anymore, then we can put you on. So let's handle this in house. I'm concerned about you running as being my running mate because I don't think the American people are going to be happy with that. Maybe she did have that conversation with him. Maybe she didn't. Hopefully, she did have that conversation with
Pete
him. But
Buttigieg said he didn't have that conversation. But to
well,
me, that's how you're taking it. How I'm taking it is you didn't go with your instinct. And that to me is
yeah.
your fault. Why didn't you go with your instinct? Because now to me, you're using this book to explain why you were set up to fail, but you were following your instincts.
But instincts sometimes are wrong. Your instincts aren't always spot on. So you start looking at this is what my instinct tells me. This is what the data is suggesting. This is historically what would have happened. And then you weigh all of these things together and you make a decision. And I'm just telling you, she's just telling us, as far as I understand it, these are some of the things that was going through my mind at this time. And if people want to know what was I thinking at this point, this is what I was thinking. It's not me putting Pete Buttigieg on blast. Everybody in the country already knows that he's gay. Everybody in the country already knows that. What's his name? The governor
Ben
of
Shapiro.
yeah, is that his name? Ben?
I
It's
mean,
not
that's not Ben
Ben. It's
Shapiro.
not.
It's
It's
Josh
Ben.
or
Josh
it's a
somebody, right?
Shapiro, but yes, Ben Shapiro is a
Yeah,
conservative
it's the
podcaster.
talking
Yeah,
post, right?
right. And my apologies to Josh because that would be an insult.
And so, but these are things that people were saying. And obviously, if people are saying these things, she's listening to what the people, she should be listening to
I
what the
don't think you
people are
should be,
saying.
and I think that's
Why
where we
not? If
can
you're the
differ.
representative of the
Because
people,
if we're going to listen to what they should be saying, then you should not be running. Because I mean,
uh,
what they're also saying is they're not going to trust a black woman because now you're over here thinking that, hey, I've got to convince them to trust me. So then they're saying that they don't trust you. Secondly, you
so
did not.
my response is let me find a way to help them trust me. Is somebody who
But if
overshadows
you're
me going
helping
to
them
help?
trust you
No.
is to go against your intuition, then
Well,
I'm just like, you're blaming your party or you're blaming whatever society standards are to go against your intuition. If your intuition was this is the best candidate for me to run with, then that's what you should have done. Don't
yeah,
blame
I
that
don't.
on anyone else but you for not following your intuition.
Well, is that blamed on her? Is she blaming it on somebody else to say, "Hey,
She's
this
blamed
is
to
what"?
me, she's blaming it on society standards, the fact that hey, they don't trust a black woman and they're definitely not gonna trust a gay.
That's
Like
true. It's true. It's
but
true. I
that's
mean,
not true.
it is true.
But if you feel like that's true,
America
then you
is not
shouldn't have
ready.
ran. Then you
America
should not have
is not.
ran.
But you run if you think you are the best possible candidate.
Right. And if
If you
you
think you
think
are the
Pete
best cop,
Buttigieg was your best possible VP, then you should have had him with you as a VP.
but if you start thinking like I'm the best possible candidate, but my candidacy might be weakened by this person who I think is the best candidate, then I'm not going to choose that person. I'm just not going to choose that person. I'm going to make a
Fine.
more
Then blame that
logical.
on your own
I'll make a more
thinking and
logical.
not on anyone's data, not on anyone else. Blame that on your
Again,
own thinking.
I don't think that she was saying, I don't think that she was putting somebody on blast. If I explain to you that this is what I'm thinking, then that's me sharing what was going on in my house. And this was me now putting me out there. She's not saying, oh, I wish Pete Buttigieg wasn't gay, or if he could have acted like he wasn't gay. No, she's processing and saying, it's not Pete Buttigieg's fault that I lost, but I wish that I could have run with him. He would have been my first choice if I thought that America was ready for that. And I don't think that America, I think it was too big of an ask to have America vote for a black. And I agree. I think it
So
was too
you
much of
blame
an ask.
America. You
No, I
blame
think
America.
I'm not blaming anybody.
Yes, you
She
are.
made the
Because
choice.
again, if this is your intuition, but that's all I'm saying is,
That's
hey,
not
you can
blaming
blame yourself
to
for not following your intuition or whatever. Just don't put the blame on, oh, I just don't think society's ready, or just don't put it on anyone else but you. You didn't follow your intuition.
to evaluate data and to make a decision based off of that evaluation is not to blame somebody. It's to simply look at what are the sentiments of America. I can
The
guarantee you she had
sentiments were
tons
they
of
didn't want a black woman either. But you
exactly.
didn't, but you ignored that.
Exactly. So
So
why
then
would you
go with what you want.
why would you put a double deficit? Put
Because
yourself at a
that
double
was what
deficit
you felt
situation.
like was the best for your campaign. If that is what you felt was the best, then you put that up. Because to be quite honest, I don't think Republicans were jumping up and down for Trump, but he won it. And that's just is what it is. And so, to me, Trump does not go with the grain of whatever it is that you think politics should work. So
And when
then
he goes with
you
his
do what you
instinct.
is best for you.
And so that's why we're having these rallies and protests around the country this week.
No
It's because
king.
it's no more kings. Is that what you're expecting? If
And what
if this
did
is what
Donald
you
Trump
think
say?
is going
I'm
to be
probably
your
not going to get
instinct,
into heaven. I couldn't believe he said that. I was like,
oh, I
wow.
didn't hear that one. He should have kept that in the house. But what was this? What was his context? He said, "I probably when at the funeral, at the
Yeah, I
memorial,
mean, I
or
can't
what?"
remember because I feel like someone asked him about it, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm probably not going to get into heaven."
Well, that's one thing I would probably agree with him on is that he's not going to get into heaven.
While also telling him you might want to discuss it with your priests versus
Yeah, but I don't know.
whoever's your
Keeping
spiritual
things in house,
counselor.
keeping things in house. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein was kept in house for how long, and they're still trying to keep it in house.
But he was also
Uh,
exposed.
yeah,
He
but
was
they're trying
also
to keep the rest of
exposed.
the stuff in house. So, how much of it are you supposed to expose? Are you supposed that once some of
But
it's exposed, to
again, to
expose it
me,
all?
that the fact that he has been exposed means yes, there was a talking to him one on one about what he's doing. That's all I'm saying. Have you had the one on one talk before you blasted this in a public forum? And that's why, again, back with Kurt Franklin, I was like, have you talked to your son one on one before you continue this feud publicly? I just don't feel like that helps. That helps the internal relationship.
Yeah. I think you probably have to look at what the goal and what the purpose of bringing it public for is. It if bringing it publicly um, serves the purpose of just making you look better, then I'm probably a little less likely to do that. If it's for the purpose of preserving, something that I stand, an organization that I represent, or people that are affiliated with me or something like that, then I'm a little bit more inclined to say, hey, this needs to be public, and I need to dissociate myself or isolate myself to it if I'm the cause. And so, but that's just me. I don't mind taking. I got broad shoulders for a reason. I can take the burden.
Yeah,
I
no, all
can
right.
bear
Someone's
the
gonna blast you on that Google.
Come talk to me first in the house about it first. Talk to me first, and
And that's exactly what I see was when you're typing. You did not say anything the entire time you were there. You waited until you got your public access to blast me.
exactly. Hey, but some people put you on blast just because they know that it's going to help them go viral too, and that's part of
Maybe,
the
maybe
issue.
not. Because again, back with Kevin Federline and Britney Spears, yes, you're writing all that to sell a book that will hopefully, for your standpoint, go viral. But I don't agree with you blasting your marriage in a book.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna share all our stuff once we get off this line today. I'm gonna have to share a couple things, call you out on a couple things, but I'll do it privately.
I was gonna say, just make sure I know a heads up so that I'm prepared to also defend myself publicly. Well, hopefully you guys have been tuning in and commenting and liking this episode. Make sure you catch a repeat on K-Day Live as well as Star Radio. And you can also follow us or subscribe to us on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast platform. So until next Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, thank you guys so much for tuning in and have a blessed week.